afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Level Up Cyber. My name is Tony Bryan, your host, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Dominic Vogel. Dominic, welcome to the show.
Tony, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to an awesome conversation.
Yeah, so we've got a really good show ahead of us right here. I think we're going to dive into a topic that's probably near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. I know I've had a lot of conversations with folks trying to break into the cybersecurity field, asking questions. Why is it so hard? Why isn't this working? Why isn't entry level the thing? So we're going to jump into that a little bit and actually have a discussion around, is there a cybersecurity skills gap and what does that mean to you? So before we jump in, it's probably an important thing for us to know who we're talking to and who we're going to learn and explore this journey with today. So Dominic, I'd love for you to take a second, tell everybody about who you are, who you work with, and how you got to where you're at.
Well, I really appreciate it, Tony. So yeah, my name is Dominic Vogel. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Don't let the Brewers hat fool you. I have a whole collection of baseball hats. That's just the one I'm wearing today. But I've been in cybersecurity close to 20 years now. I spent much of my corporate career, which is the first sort of 10 years of my career in the financial services industry. Past 10 years, I've been an entrepreneur, solopreneur, very much focusing on small and mid-sized organizations. My company, Vogel Leadership and Coaching, focuses on two main initiatives. One is focusing on fractional cybersecurity leadership for organizations, primarily those that have not established a cybersecurity risk management function in their organization. So they bring me in to build that program from the ground up. I also have a coaching focus where a lot of large organizations with larger IT teams will bring me in to help level up their people, their IT people, and make them more well-rounded human beings. So working on stuff like communication, being able to work on people skills, things like that. So it's something that I love doing. And yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell, Tony.
I always think of Austin Powers in the nutshell when somebody says that.
Good reference. Good reference.
So what did your journey, right, to break into cyber, what did that look like for you?
So for me, when I went to school and I studied computer science, and that was what my background degree is in. And at the time, this is going back 20-ish years, and security roles were just not really out there. There were few, and when I was studying, I knew I didn't want to be a developer. Everything in my degree was geared around code and developing and becoming a software developer, and I was like, I really don't want to do this. One day, my dad, he's now a retired high school computer science and physics teacher, brought home a huge stack of magazines. And he dropped it on the foot of my bed. He said, "There's got to be something in here that interests you." And so I flipped through all these technical magazines, and this magazine popped out when I knocked the pile over, and it said information security. I was like, "What in God's green earth is information security?" And I read it cover to cover. And I still have it somewhere in the mess that is my office. But the thing that really inspired me about it was that it just wasn't technical. It was talking about stuff like risk, people. There was math involved, statistics, and technology. It was so interesting. It was so multidisciplinary. And I thought that's what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And I finished my 4-year degree, and the word cybersecurity or information security was uttered once, and it was me in the class. I said, "Well, when can we learn about information security?" And the professor said, "Never. That's not what we teach here." And so I ended up self-studying. I got my Security Plus certification after I graduated, and I knew I wanted to do something in cybersecurity, and I held out. And this is at a time when there were very few cybersecurity roles, and it took me almost 8 months. After door closing in my face, both literally and figuratively. And I interviewed for a junior security analyst role at a global logistics company in Vancouver. And the security manager, was a security team of 2 at the time. They were looking to expand to 3. He said to me, you have so much passion and grit about this. He said, you seem so coachable, and that you really want to be part of this team. He said, "I'm going to pay you crap." He actually used another word, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear or not. But he basically said, "I'm going to pay you next to nothing, but the job is yours." And that's how I got into the field, right? And it was so important that someone took a chance on me. And that's why I think it's so important all these years later. Something that I always advocate for is that we need to give people a chance, because had he not given me a chance, I came very close to pursuing another field.
Yeah, I mean, so you're looking for the Cadillac, settled for a Pinto, and eventually landed yourself with the Ferrari several years later, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of those things, and I mean, I think it'll tie in, and I would like to probably address it as we keep going down this conversation, because it is
Yeah.
oftentimes, people have opportunities that they want to take, and they might not be the opportunity, right? It might not be the SOC or the pen testing role that they had envisioned in all their classes they took. So they want to hold on and wait for that. Sometimes it's just better to get in where you fit in, and the rest is going to, like you did, pave your own path, make your own opportunities, continue to learn and grow, and the rest will pay dividends in the end. So I imagine you're like me. You've probably had hundreds of people reach out to you over the last several years and say, Dominic, help me. I can't find a job. I did this. I went to this 4-year degree. I got this community college certification. I got this Sec Plus or CISSP. Nobody will hire me. I can't find a job. Is there such a thing as entry level? And then you hear the other side of this is there's 500,000 jobs that are available. We can't find enough people. Come get your certification. So we have two very different and very polarizing subjects. So, what is your, in a short amount, like what is your kind of take on the juxtaposition of those two things? Like where is the fundamental disconnect there?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Tony. And there's two pieces that I want to talk about there. So the first is with people who are in a position where they're finding like they're not making any inroads. I find a lot of people don't apply what I refer to as apply smartly. They basically will say, "Oh, I've applied to 300 jobs the past 2 weeks." I was like, "How did you do that?" "Oh, I just applied to all these jobs online." This isn't a problem which you approach by just throwing stuff at it, right? You need to be intelligent about this. And I'm a big believer that if you try to just apply to as many jobs as you can, that's the wrong way of doing it. To me, the best way of maximizing your chance of landing an opportunity is to spend time networking, building relationships, meeting people, both virtually, physically, going out and having conversations, meeting hiring managers, using platforms like LinkedIn to develop a brand for yourself. That's how you're going to get your job. That's how you get your first job. That's how you get your second job. That's how you're going to propel your career to brand new heights. It's not by just applying to hundreds of jobs that you just found online. So that's one thing that I want to address. I think so many people don't apply to jobs in a effective and efficient manner. So that's that sort of side of the coin. In terms of the disconnect that you mentioned there, Tony, and you're absolutely right. There's a fundamental disconnect. There's no shortage of great people that could be entering the security workforce. What we have though is, and I'll argue that there is a gap or a skills gap. The skills gap is actually at the top of the pyramid. It's at the leadership ranks. We have far too many archaic thinkers that run various security teams that have very dated thinking. In that they think unless you've come up through the IT ranks, unless you've given your time and been part of help desk and all that, you're not good enough to be part of the security team. That type of pervasive thinking is still quite, or sorry, that type of older thinking, I should say, is still quite pervasive in our industry, and there's far too much gatekeeping happening. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have said, "Oh, we've had this job open for 6 months." I said, "Well, how many people have you interviewed?" "Oh, we interviewed like, tens or dozens of people." And I actually went through this with a process with a client recently, and I said, "Well, these people all seem like they have a lot of passion and grit and seem really coachable. Oh, but you know what? They don't have any experience." Well, you're hiring them for an entry level position. Well, what do you mean they don't have experience, right? You hire for, again, passion, grit, determination, right? How are they going to enhance the culture of your team? All the technical stuff you can teach down the road, So I think that's where the disconnect is, where you have far too many gatekeepers looking for unicorns that don't exist. What you need is people to take a chance on people to really just bring our industry forward, because it's funny, Tony. It's funny and also not funny. 20 years ago, when I started, the industry was, I remember going to my first industry conference. I was like, wow, there's a lot of pissed off middle-aged white guys here. 20 years later, and I recognize the irony, 20 years later, I am a pissed off middle-aged white guy, but 20 years later, yeah, I've seen some things improve, but still even much at the leadership ranks, it's still much of the same as it was 20 years ago. If we truly want to solve our problems, we need to move forward and diversify our workforce.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's I've only been involved for almost last 8 years, a little over almost 9, and we've seen it. We've thrown a lot of money at it, right? We've thrown a lot of money at search and training. We've thrown a lot of money at products and services, and I think we've done a really good job of creating a sense of urgency for companies to react and buy things. We've created a sense of urgency for individuals that you spend a little bit of money, you can make 6 figures, right? So we've created a really big perfect storm for where we are right now. So if you had a magic wand and you could sit here and try to solve this problem, right? Where how do we connect the hiring best practices of corporations to what colleges and universities or programs like CyberUp are putting out, right? Because I think we're all putting out smart people with tenacity and grit. The hard part is how do you translate that tenacity and grit to jobs, and then and build out what I would call skills-based hiring best practices for these organizations. So where would you start as an organization to really implement those changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and to me, like I said, if I had that elusive magic wand, the first thing is to shatter the myth that someone needs to have been part of an IT team to be part of a cybersecurity team. That's you don't, and I think we're talking about this before we went on here, Tony. The cool thing about security is that so many of us have so many different ways that we've entered the field, right? Some of the smartest security people I know never held an IT job. In fact, one of the smartest security professionals I know, someone who I look up to, his degree was in music, it was like oboe or something, and he's a brilliant security mind, right? He held a sales position with a security organization, and then he ended up being become more of a practitioner, and he's incredibly brilliant. He never held an IT job. You don't. I think to me, if I could use that use that wand, is to shatter the myths, shatter the stereotypes of yesteryear. Where going back 20 years, the original security teams were cultivated from the IT ranks, right? That was 20 years ago. If I could use that wand, it would be to truly make a security team that comes from people from all different walks of life. Some of the best security teams I have seen and come across, and I've had the opportunity to coach, the teams are made up from people from all different walks of life. Yes, there's people who've had IT experience, but there's others who've maybe come from sales or marketing, or someone who used to do something else in technology. That to me is where I would wave my magic wand.
We've had a lot of good success with kind of medical billing. Customer service is really seems to be a really good transition from the human relationship side of things to explain. Law enforcement, military is obviously always there's a general inquisitive nature for those folks, and kind of a heightened sense of awareness of kind of bad things. So we've waved a wand, we've solved it. We can just end the conversation and move on. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. So and I don't want to to use this this time together to feel like we're throwing companies under the bus, because that's really not the intent. Because there's lots of pieces to this, right? Like I think there's a large trend across the country around apprenticeship, right, which where we play of trying to create apprenticeship degrees. What do you feel organizations like CyberUp or universities that have cyber programs, what can they be doing better, on their end to help prepare and help maybe close this skills gap for employers?
Yeah, that to me is a great question, Tony. And for me, it's less about specific technology or specific tools. I think it's more. You mentioned the term there around the mindset, right? Being able to instill or at least prepare sort of that inquisitive mindset. And like you said, with some professions, it becomes more of a natural byproduct than others. But being able to at least help people cultivate that mindset, I think, is so important. That inquisitive mindset, that healthy dose of skepticism, right? You don't want to be pumping out people who are putting on aluminum tinfoil hats, but having a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, is super important. I think the other thing too is being able to bring out people that are able to seamlessly fall into a security role, and being someone that's not just able to just use a piece of technology. I often see the biggest training gap as someone who is maybe unable to have a conversation with someone outside of the confines of a technology tool, right? Maybe being able to help them understand concepts like risk, and so they can be that type of person at the organization where more and more security teams aren't sitting in isolation. Right, security teams are pervasive. They're throughout the organization. Sometimes they're not even necessarily under the IT team, right? So I think being able to cultivate that type of mindset, and then people that are coming through these programs and institutions, I think that to me is part of the missing link in being able to help these people hit the ground running.
So you also mentioned a little bit around, what individuals, the networking and the putting yourself out there, conferences, and those are all good. What are some other things that an individual can do on their end, right? So we've covered companies need to get better at hiring best practices, job description writing. Universities need to get a little bit better, and I think colleges, the ones that I've seen in St. Louis, maybe we're lucky where we just do have a good, solid foundation of academic institutions that are able to get advice and get kind of guidance around their curriculum from industry professionals locally, which is fantastic. But everything I've seen is most colleges have really good perspectives from industry, right? That are giving in, that are weighing into their curriculum. The challenge generally has been the pace in which technology is advancing is really hard for traditional education to keep up with that pace. So in the absence of that, right? So let's say I'm in a program and I'm a student and I'm trying to get through. What are some things that I should do in addition to maybe my college education, where I might not get a certification, or I'm going to have to go seek, we'll call it hands-on experience? What are some things that you would suggest that a student would do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tony. And it even starts with checking out local associations in the area that you live. So as an example, ISACA, which stands for the Information Security Audit something Association. can't remember.
I think of what ISACA stands for.
Yeah, whether it be ISACA or ISC squared, there's a lot of great local security associations, and you have to Google and see where your local chapter is. But being able to go there, a lot of these associations have great mentorship programs or opportunities where you can get, I'll say, hands-on experience in maybe a mentorship situation or in a like a co-op or a short-term placement position where you're able to tap into local organizations and be able to get some hands-on experience for free, right? And also that helps from a networking perspective, because a lot of the organizations that are seeking some of that help, those people are hiring managers, right? Those people are hiring directors, right? They're looking to continually grow their team. They're looking to always have their people in the talent pipeline, right? So that to me is a great spot to start, and that can often be done for little to no cost.
Yeah, I'll just add, B-sides are always a great,
absolutely
great local chapters. Like I think St. Louis' B-side is pretty low, but Kansas City's got a great B-sides. Finding those types of things. I'm a fan of OWASP. A lot of open web application security protocols, and I think I maybe got that right. But we have a good chapter of OWASP, but we have a great leader of our OWASP chapter, which that makes a big difference.
Absolutely,
the flavor. InfraGard is another good one.
Yep.
Not all chapters are created equally for InfraGard, but those are also a really good way. And then the other piece I would add is just attending cons, like doing hackathons, CTFs, cons. I think you're gonna. I know for me, I've noticed a very different vibe from a B-side /con to an ISACA /conference, right? There's a hacker mindset mentality, I think, for the B-sides, the DEF cons and the CTFs, and there's more policy, procedure, rules, regulations on the management side. Both are important, right? And they both are there. So it's a really good way, we were talking about skills for those cons, is for folks to bolster skills through those things.
Absolutely. And the other thing too on that note, Tony, I think that's a brilliant point that you pointed out, but I think it's important to be able to expose yourself to both, right? Because then you'll be able to see what it is in security that might interest you, right? Because again, security has evolved over the past 20 years. When I started, it was a field of generalists, right? Like you just did everything. Now it's very much, it's like the field of medicine. It's very, very specialized, right? So especially early on in your career, the more that you expose yourself to the different, many facets that make up cybersecurity, you'll be like, oh, that's actually really interesting, right? Or as you evolve as a person, like when I started out my career, I was all about the tech, right? The hands-on stuff. I love doing that. around the 7-year mark, I was like, you know what, I actually really hate doing that. And I ended up finding out that I really like doing the talking part, right? The risk management part, right? Talking to leaders, talking to the board of directors. I didn't think I liked doing that when I started my career, but I had the opportunity to expose myself to that type of stuff over the course of my early on in my career, and then I found out that I really liked it. So I think don't paint yourself in a corner. Expose yourself to the different opportunities in the field.
Especially when you don't know the corners, right? That's the problem. Is
Yeah,
there's new corners being made in this almost every single year, right?
that's so true. Yep.
You if you paint yourself like I want to go do pen testing, right? We really got to think through AI is on the horizon. There are tasks and functions that are going to be automated, and those roles will still exist, but probably in a very different way. I don't. So I just think, as you're going through programs, looking at skills, you really got to read the tea leaves a little bit to see, okay, what jobs will be impacted by AI. I think SOC stuff has a really big, opportunity to get impacted by AI, where you can create bots and functions that report on beeps and bops and boops and alarms that are going off to know if they're good or bad, right? Because right now it's a very manual process. So as we look ahead to what the next 5 to say 10 years, right? I'm not going to try soapbox and preach here too much, but we're at a really strange point as a world, right? We have 4 generations in the workforce. Give it another 5 years, we're going to have 5 with Gen A. So we're gonna have a huge amount of difference of opinions in the workforce. What we're finding is that these Gen Zs and Gen As, these younger folks that are coming through, colleges have not done enough to prove to them that the juice is worth the squeeze. So I really anticipate, unless colleges make a massive fundamental shift, that younger students are not going to go pursue 4-year degrees. I don't think corporate America is ready for that, right? If we lose 50% of college enrollments to go to non-traditional kind of pathways or apprenticeship types of programs, we've got a lot of catching up to do for these corporations, right? So what can we start doing now? You know what I mean? To really start paving the way and doing some of the groundwork we need to do to really ready our entire corporate workforce over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
I'm mindful that's a big question, but
that's I think really what it comes down to, I think, is removing a lot of the rigidity and having organizations have greater adaptability and flexibility. So, as an example, I've seen this over the course of the past 10 years for myself, and I'm very much going to see, I believe that to be the case with moving forward, a rise in fractional services, right? So you have people who specialize in maybe doing HR or marketing, or in the case of me, like fractional cybersecurity leadership. 10 years ago, it was sort of new and no one really accepted it. It wasn't until the pandemic happened where people were like, hey, you know what? We actually don't need people's butts physically in seats to provide value. The pandemic was a massive catalyst for myself and other people who provide fractional services. I really believe that we're going to, especially with Gen Z as well, people who want to have some control over their destiny and be able to, we're going to just keep seeing a rise, I truly believe, of these types of fractional services. So I think more and more, I think the competitive organization of tomorrow, or the competitive organization 10 years from now, there's going to be maybe, core employees, but they need to be flexible and adaptable enough to recognize, hey, you know what, maybe the core to our mission, that's where we're going to have our employees, and everything that's not core to the mission, we're going to just leverage fractional services to be able to do that. I really believe that's what successful organizations of tomorrow are going to look like, but who knows? As my wife likes to point out, I'm wrong 9 times out of 10. So ask me in 10 years, Tony.
Well, it's one of those things. I actually had an easier question to ask. How do we incorporate world peace? Can we answer that one real quick? No, it's a good point. I am very, I have 3 Gen Zers right now, and and some of them are interested in school and some are not. And so, I think the idea of, we were watching things like DoorDash, drop shipping for Amazon delivery, where I can do these jobs and make a really good living and not have to work 40 hours a week and clock in and clock out, and I can control my time. So, I think there's a combo of what you just described, better job descriptions and readying the workforce, but it's also, I think we have to reimagine how we actually work. I don't know. I don't know if I've gone as far as the 4-day work week in my head just yet, or, you know, like I know there's a lot of kind of crazy, I won't say crazy, but there's a lot of ideas that are floating around to do it. But I do think we're going to have to reimagine a little bit what the future workforce looks like and how we do attract younger folks to come work with individuals, right?
And you know, the interesting thing too on that, Tony, and I've seen that just in sort of small sample size, and it's, you know, how I approach, you know, my work as a consultant. I don't do billable hours, right? Like, to me, I focus on what I refer to as value-based outcomes, and I think that's really what eventually the workforce is going to need to do. In which arbitrarily you having to be here 9 to 5 means jack all, right? What can, you know, in your role, right? This is what values or outcomes we're expecting over 6 months. How and when they manifest or should be irrelevant, right? And I truly believe, again, organizations that want to be competitive and get best on best talent in the future have to take that type of approach, because the having to clock in at 9 and all that stuff and not having any malleability or flexibility, Gen Z isn't going to take that. Gen A sure as hell isn't going to take that, right? Even, you know, people right now, you know, and I'm an elder millennial, people my generation are not taking that either, right? Like it's to me, we're seeing that being sort of passed down generation to generation, and they're having less of a tolerance for that. So like I said, I really believe that the 40-hour work week, 5 days a week type thing, again, organizations that cling to that, they're going to quickly find that they're not going to get best on best talent, right? I really believe it needs to focus more so on, again, value-based outcomes, right? What does this role need to achieve over the course of a year or 6 months or a quarter or what have you, and things be re-engineered in that fashion.
Yeah. The one other piece I want to talk in line with your fractional, because I think a lot of small to mid-sized businesses implement fractional services because it's a cost savings for them, right? Like
Sure.
Manufacturer's not going to go out, let's say, that's making Kleenex boxes, right? they're probably, you know, they got one product, they're doing the thing, they're not huge enough, but they still have need. So they can't afford a full suite. So that fractional service is really important. How do you envision, like, you know, and I you know, the point of the transition to the actual question. So as more and more do this fractional services, I think a lot of people have a tendency to gravitate towards the large organizations they all know, the CrowdStrikes, and they're all great organizations. So CrowdStrike, Splunks, even your large Fortune 100, your Microsofts and Accentures that are out there. There's a lot of little hidden nuggets that are out there around manufacturing, small healthcare systems, and a lot of these other organizations. I think that people have a tendency to sleep on, unfortunately. You know, where's some outside of the box places you could, you know, would recommend for people to kind of look and find opportunities that are outside of the big norm?
Yeah, that that's a really, really good question. And you know what? For me, I love hanging out on platforms like LinkedIn. I get to find so many interesting people. I've had so many clients that I've received through the relationships I developed on that platform that I would never have thought was possible, right? So to me, it's about having relationships in areas that you didn't think would be directly, you know, beneficial to you, right? So as an example, you know, as a security consultant, one would think, oh, you know what, I should be focusing on business owners in this group, or focusing on financial services or regulated spaces. But, you know, one of my greatest sources of referrals has come by investing in relationships with other solopreneurs, right? People who, they're not my direct buyer, they never will be my direct buyer. But by looking at, I'll say, ecosystems where you can introduce yourself into, but maybe there isn't a security professional there. It's trying to, again, just think a little bit differently. And the other thing too is by just be willing to lead with kindness. I was having a conversation with someone today how he runs this big sales team. He said that he instills not sales in his team, but by leading sales through kindness, investing in relationships, putting people first, right? Not trying to just call up someone and try and sell yourself, but actually just trying to focus on building a meaningful relationship first. So I'm not sure if this directly answers your question, but like, to me, the best spots of, you know, those hidden gems, they actually come by not trying to find work. They come by just trying to put yourself out there as a friend.
I think the word you're skirting around is authenticity.
Let's go with that, Tony.
You're being authentic to yourself, right? And you're finding other authentic people that value the thing that you're bringing. And like all too often, I think that authenticity is oftentimes fake, right? Or somebody's faking authenticity, or they are.
Yep.
I don't fake anything. So, and I've got the sense in our conversation that you don't either. So last question, everybody gets it. What advice would you give to somebody to level up their cybersecurity career?
Oh, that's an awesome question to end on, Tony. Um, so to me, I'm going to rehash some of the stuff that I already said. Don't just sit at your computer and blindly apply to jobs, right? Get out there, meet people, start having conversations, develop friendships, go on platforms like LinkedIn, start commenting on posts, developing relationships. Like I said, I'm a big believer that it's not about just applying to jobs online, right? You can still do that, but take the time to develop relationships, leverage your network, right? If you take the time to develop your friendships, and you see, hey, I'm going to apply at this place here, but I've already spent 6 months developing a friendship with hiring manager there. Maybe I can get past the HR system kind of thing. Take the time to invest in relationships first, then apply smartly.
I like it. Well, Dom, I appreciated the conversation today. Thank you so much for your time and the great words of advice. I encourage you, if you haven't connected with Dominic, reach out to him on LinkedIn. Add him. He does a lot of great content and a lot of things to learn from. So a great source of information. So appreciate your time today, Dom.
Tony, thank you so much, my friend. This was a blast. And thanks for being amazingly you. I appreciate you, Tony.
Well, thank you. You guys have a great week. Do, do, do.